We study through books of the Bible here at the Village Chapel. It makes it a little bit easier for a guy like me who's not very clever to know what next week is all about. Next week is all about whatever follows last week. And then we have this monumental decision to make. And you can ask my wife, I go through this little bit of a panic each time I get to the end of a book. I don't like saying farewell to Mark. You know, I liked Mark. We had a great study through that. But then I also had to make a decision. I had to choose where we go next. And prayed, Lord, tell me what to do. And we're going to go to Hosea tonight. Hosea. That's the part of your Bible where the pages are still stuck together. And so if you'll kind of look for that spot in your Bible where it seems to still be new, for most of us anyway, Hosea, it's right after Daniel in the Old Testament. And if you'll turn back there, we have a couple extra copies of the scriptures here. If you would like one, it really helps to follow along. Raise your hand if you need one, and Mark will be glad to drop one off where you're sitting right there. Hosea. I'll give a little extra time for you to find it. In my Bible, it's page 878, but I don't know what it is in yours. We have many different translations out there. Hosea is the name of the book. Great book. We're going to love it. 14 chapters, 197 verses, 5,175 words, for those of you who keep track of such things. And if you do, you scare me. This is a 14-chapter book, though the first 3 chapters will serve as a prologue, but also a living parable. We'll take just the first chapter tonight and do a little bit of introduction to these books that are typically called the minor prophets. I don't really like that term for them because it makes, in some ways, it sort of diminishes them. They're not minor in the sense of, like we think of baseball, like major and minor leagues. These guys are not, somehow or another, not quite up to the game of the major prophets. Minor here just simply refers to the volume of material that they either had written or that we have recorded from their preachments or whatever it might be. Hosea will be the longest, 14 chapters of the minor prophets, but they're minor only in the sense that the amount of material on them is small compared to like Isaiah or Jeremiah or Daniel or Ezekiel. So here we have Hosea, this fascinating book. And let's begin in verse 1. The word of the Lord which came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. Now I'm going to stop there for just a second. One of the things I love about the Bible is that it is not just a fairy book, not just a book of myth, not just a legend. This is a book that is actually set in space-time history. That's why when we see this, it's important, I think, to just take a second and think about it. These are real names of real people that actually lived. We're given here a few names of the kings of the southern kingdom, some of the guys from Judah. Their names are Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And these are guys that actually lived, real people, real names in the southern kingdom of Israel, the southern 2 tribes. During the days of Jeroboam, who was king of Israel, he would be up in the northern kingdom. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Biblical history is important for several reasons. I'm going to put a couple of these up on the screen for you. Biblical history is important because, first of all, it captures the imagination. If I were to stand up here and go, the Greek word for this or the Hebrew word for that, and spew forth just a lot of data, that's one thing, and some people find that interesting. A lot of people's eyes sort of glaze over when I start in that mode, though. History and narrative are different because they capture the imagination. We begin to even have vicarious experiences as we read about these real people who lived in a real context, a real cultural context, a national context, a political context, a spiritual context. Some of them, and in this particular case tonight, a real family context, and it's a real dysfunctional family context. On purpose, God's got a reason. We'll get into that in just a little bit as we get through this. But we can have our imagination stirred, not just our mind, sort of thrilled by data, but we can actually have our heart stirred, our imagination stirred as we study a book like this. And because it's a story, it bridges the gap between the 2,700 years of difference between now and when this guy lived. And we're going to get to experience some of what he struggled with and some of what was what filled him with joy. And it's going to be really great. Biblical history is good for that. It really does help us by stirring the imagination. Secondly, biblical history is a great teacher. It's a good teacher. I think I put up on the screen there, but it's really a great teacher. From the pages of biblical history, we learn about who God is. We're not left in the dark. It's not just go out there and discover God on your own. No, we can't discover God. God's revealed Himself to us. That's great. See, that's good. He's given us the help that we needed to know about Him. And that's what the Scriptures are all about. He reveals Himself. So we learn through biblical history about who God is, who we are, how we can have a relationship with God, and how that relationship should work and work properly, and how that relationship can be righted when it goes wrong in some way. And we learn that not only is God the creator of the world, but He also wants to be called Father. And so there is a certain endearing nature to God, that He wants to be in relationship with us. Yes, He owns everything in the universe. You can draw a big line between God and everything else that exists. And God is the self-sufficient, the originator, the source of all things. Draw a line, and then anything else that exists is something that He created. Now, some of the things in His world, because of the fact that humans have chosen to, as the theologians call it, the fall, I call it the jump, we have chosen to go our own way. And so some of what is wrong in the world, a lot of it is a direct result of that jump. And all of it is at least an indirect result of that jump, where we brought sin into the world by making this choice. And so the creation itself is tainted and distorted, as well as our lives, our relationships are distorted because we continue to rebel against God. This book will be very enlightening as it relates to all of that. It's a good teacher, biblical history is. Thirdly, biblical history reminds us that Christianity is an historic faith, that God is the primary agent in the history He has created, not fantasy or myth, as I said before. His plan of redemption is worked out in the crucible of dates, places, and personalities. And we'll see that, the relationship aspect of that in this book really clearly. Old Testament makes up about 77% of the Bible. 40% of the Old Testament is historical narrative or story like this. And so it's important, I think, for us to give some attention to it. As we study, we'll be looking for a couple of things. We'll be looking to see, what does the text say? What does this chapter, what does this book actually say? We'll look for, what does it mean? Okay, not just the data, but what does it actually mean? Thirdly, we'll look for what does the text teach? And by the way, and that what did it mean is up there on the screen too. I love that because we're going to try to get inside some of the history of the moment when it was written. Some of that, what was the context, the cultural, historical context when this book was written or when these books were written as we go through some of these minor prophets together. So what does the text teach then about God, ourselves, and others? And fourthly, how does it apply to us today? How can this book jump 2,700 years and come right here to where we're at and mean something to us? Much of the Old Testament focuses on the relationship between God and His chosen people, the nation of Israel. From the book of Genesis, we learn about Israel's beginning and early history, the call of Abraham, the promises to Abraham about how the Lord would give His descendants the land of Israel, but also that He would make His descendants as numerous as the stars of the heavens, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. You've been down to the seashore before. There's a lot of sand out there, just in a foot square. Or if you buried somebody that you took along to the beach and you dug a hole and buried them in it and left them there. No, and came home. No, but you buried somebody. All that sand is just thousands, millions of granules of sand. And the Lord said to Abraham, "I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as that." And then He also said an interesting thing in Genesis. He said, "And through you, all nations will be blessed," foreshadowing a bit of what Christ would do through the line of Abraham and through this people, the nation of Israel. We read about His 12 sons in Genesis, who became the namesakes of the 12 tribes of Israel. The stories of Joseph, how he was sold as a slave into Egypt by his brothers, and that God gave him favor with the leaders there. And then the people of Israel grew. Actually, all of his family moved down there, and the people of Israel grew there in Egypt to a great number of people. And the new leadership of Egypt didn't treat them so well, treated them as slaves. They cried out years and years and years later. They cried out for deliverance. God sent this reluctant prophet and deliverer, Moses. And he led them out. It's called the Exodus, and we read about it in the book of Exodus. And they wandered through the wilderness for 40 years. You know the story. They came to the Promised Land eventually when God said it was time. They came to the Promised Land. They came in, and under Joshua's leadership, they conquered it and they occupied it. And then these 12 tribes of Israel were each given part of the land. And so we come to the time of the monarchy at that point, what's called the monarchy. And King Saul is the first one. I'll put these guys up on the screen for you, just so you have a little bit of the background to Hosea. Let me put some of these kings up here for you. Look up on the screen. 1032 to 1010 is King Saul, B.C. 1010 to 970 B.C. was King David. 970 and 930 B.C., King Solomon. Then the kingdom, after Solomon died, the kingdoms were divided. There was a bit of a civil war. And the northern 10 tribes became more often referred to as Israel or Ephraim sometimes when you read through the Bible. And then the 2 tribes in the south, Judah and Benjamin, were referred to as Judah. And Jerusalem, of course, was down there. And the house of David continued to reign down there. But you'll see up on the screen that the northern kingdom of Israel lasted from 930 to 722 BC. And the southern kingdom from 930 to 586. In 722, and I see some of your eyes glazing over, wake up. In 722, the Assyrians will come and run over top of the northern kingdom. They'll just run over top of the 10 tribes and basically carry them all away. And that's why they're called the lost tribes of Israel. They're not really lost. God knows where they are, but they didn't know where they are, and we don't know where they are. And they were carried away, and that was basically the end of the 10 tribes. In 586, in the southern kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar comes from Babylon and runs over top of Jerusalem, destroys the temple, and carries away all of the children of Judah as well. So that happened in real space-time history. Hosea lives, and his ministry, I guess I should say, is probably 750 to 722 BC. He lives in the northern kingdom in this 8th century period of time. His contemporaries in the northern kingdom of Israel included Jonah and Amos. You know those names, I'm sure. Jonah and Amos. In the southern kingdom, coincident with that, Isaiah and Micah had ministries that were starting and where they were prophets down there speaking for the Lord. So let's read a little bit more of Hosea and see what this book is all about. Verse 2. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take to yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry. For the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord." Has the Lord ever told you to do something and you went, "You want me to what?" You know? I mean, I've been there. Some of you have been there too. This had to come as a shock to Hosea's parents, who I'm certain were hoping that he would marry somebody of, refinement, somebody with a nice pedigree and somebody of good character and somebody that they could, have a great wedding ceremony, be proud of their new daughter-in-law. And no, here comes God saying, "Hosea, take a wife of harlotry." And it had to come as a shock. I wonder how it felt to him, maybe he had his eye on somebody else. I don't know. But the Lord comes and tells him to do something. He's got a purpose. He's got a mission involved in it. And he says, "Take this wife of harlotry, because the land has committed flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord." Some of your Bibles will say abandoning the Lord. That's the great thing I love about this book, Hosea. We're going to get God's perspective we tend to think in our perspective all the time. We tend to think about how this impacts us. How's this going to affect us? We're kind of narcissistic. We're always sort of looking at ourselves and thinking that we're sort of the center of it all. But God has done this amazing thing in this book. He has opened His heart to show us how it breaks when His people abandon Him. When His people turn their back on Him. When His people dismiss Him in some way. And I think that's just the most amazing thing about this book. Well, Hosea is obedient. Verse 3, he goes and takes Gomer the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Man, there's a name. Golly! Or is that Goober? I can't remember. I get Gomer and Goober. That's Gomer. Is that Gomer? Yeah. Golly, Hosea. I'm sorry. He wasn't then. He wasn't around then, was he? Gomer, though, it's kind of a funny name. These names in the Old Testament sometimes are just I have to stop, and it's like the 800-pound gorilla. You got to say something about that. You can't let that go. He went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, verse 4, name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel. There's another name, Jehu the Yahoo. Jehu. This guy is a violent guy, and this is why the Lord is going to punish the house of Jehu. In 2 Kings chapter 9 and 10, if you want to read it yourself, you're welcome to do that. This guy actually served the Lord to some capacity. When Ahab, the wicked king Ahab, and Jezebel, his wife, had just gone off the deep end, one of the things that the Lord did was raise up this fellow Jehu, and he came along, and he was instrumental in bringing about some of God's judgment on some of these wicked kings and these wicked people in the northern kingdom. But the problem was he got so upset with Ahab, so angry about it, and sort of got carried away with the violence of it all. And at one point what happened was he actually took 70 of Ahab's grandsons and had their heads cut off. And it just, his violence, his penchant for violence and anger, just it got away from him. Have you ever known somebody that hated somebody else? Maybe a parent, they hated their parent. Or maybe they hated an authority figure. They hated them so much that they ended up becoming like them. And I think that's what happened to Jehu here. Is I think he ended up becoming like Ahab and he even sacrificed to Baal. And so we see, if you want to study his life, you're welcome to do that. But the Lord said to Hosea, name this kid Jezreel, because in a while I'm going to punish the house of Jehu, the bloodshed of Jezreel. I'll put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. They had not repudiated these actions, these violent actions of Jehu. And their land was just full of violence. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that in verse 1, one of the reasons why we're given a list of the kings of Judah, but only one, Jeroboam of Israel, is because there were so many coups, so many overthrows. You know, that some of the kings only lasted a minute, you know. And so there are just so many, and it's such a stark judgment that God's bringing for the violence and the bloodshed of Jezreel. It will come about on that day, verse 5, I'll break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. We're told several times in the Old Testament He will break the bow of Israel's enemies. Here, we're told He will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. The bow standing for their military strength, their might, their ability, their power to be violent. And God's basically saying, you know what? You're no longer a power for me. You've gone off now. You're a power unto yourself. And you're just a land full of violence, and I need to judge you. Jezreel is fascinating as the location that this will happen. I'll tell you why. If you've read the book of Judges, as they came into the promised land, Deborah and Barak will defeat the enemies, the armies of Canaan, under General Sisera, right there at the valley of Jezreel. A little bit later, Gideon, with his 300 guys, remember those guys with the horns and the flashlights? They take on the Midianites and destroy them. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of them, but only 300 of them, of Gideon's men. Valley of Jezreel. A lot of victory, a lot of good victories that took place there. But yet this had turned into now this place of habitual violence, this place of anger and bitterness and violence. And God says, I'm going to judge them there. And indeed He does, because in 733 to 722, a 10-year campaign, the Assyrians decimate Israel in the valley of Jezreel. It happens right there, just as Hosea's prophecy said. Well, she conceives back to Hosea and Gomer, verse 6. She conceives again and gave birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to him, name her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel. The name means no compassion, no mercy, that I should ever forgive them. Verse 7. I will have compassion on the house of Judah. That's the southern kingdom, the two tribes down there, and deliver them by the Lord their God, and will not deliver them by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. When she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived, that means Gomer conceived, and gave birth to a son. And the Lord said, name him Lo Ami, for you are not my people and I am not your God. We'll stop there for just a second. Pretty amazing what's going on here. The first child, we're told, was born that Gomer had, and she actually bore him a son, the end of verse 3 says. The other two children, we're not told that she bore him a son. Some commentators suggest that perhaps the harlotry had continued and that the other two children were not Hosea's children, but products of Gomer's continued harlotry. Not sure about that, we speculate, but it's quite possible. I think the best way to get inside of what's going on here, though, is to look a little bit at these two principal characters in this first chapter. Don't just think of Homer as one of the books of the Old Testament. Of Hosea as Homer. Don't just think of Hosea. Don't just think of Hosea as one of the Old Testament books, or just some distant name from the past, or Gomer for that matter. These are real people. He's a prophet, yeah. So his job is to speak for God. What a wild call of God on his life. Sometimes God calls us to do some pretty unusual things. He responded faithfully. But he was a prophet, but he was also a husband in this chapter. And as I say, maybe he thought he deserved better. Maybe he thought he deserved someone who would be faithful to him in some way. And he was also a father, and maybe a father to two children that weren't really his by blood. I don't know. Maybe. It's possible. Real person, Hosea. Gomer, real person too. The unfaithful lover and wife. Like Israel, her heart had turned away from her husband. Israel had turned away from the Lord, we're told, at the beginning of the chapter. And this is a picture, a living parable of that. She had a roving eye and a wandering heart. And she engaged in self-destructive behavior. And in many ways, she's a person that I think we can look at and have empathy or pity on too, because of what was going on in her life. She's a real person, and I want to constantly underscore that. She was a mother too, but unfortunately, she modeled unfaithfulness for her children. Probably they grew up not knowing what it would mean to have a healthy relationship, what it would mean to be faithful, and maybe she passed on this heritage of pain and brokenness and this dysfunctional, model that for her children to see as they grew up. They symbolized also, these kids did, the decaying spiritual life of the children of Israel. Think about them for just a second. Jezreel. As I said, I gave you that little bit of history on Jezreel and the violence that was there. And I think Jehu, the one that perpetrated all that violence, reminds us that when we are bitter or angry at the faults of someone else, we must be on our guard, because we may very well become like that person. It's so easy to point out the sin in somebody else's life, isn't it? That's why the Lord told us, take the beam out of your own eye before you worry about the speck in somebody else's eye. It's because we just have this ability to see our own sin in other people. It's real clear in other people. It's so crystal clear in other people. Not so clear when we look in the mirror. Well, just as Hosea predicted, as I said, 722, the Assyrians came and ran over top of Israel. These children that he had, I think he was around then. I think Hosea was there in 722, probably around for all of that. But look at Jezreel, as I said. Look at this Lo Ruhamah, her name meaning no compassion, no mercy. She reflects the truth that while God's love goes way beyond any human love, still, God's love is not blind, and it is not coercive either. God sees the sin and rebellion in our hearts. He's aware of our lack of devotion. The third child, Lo Ami, not my child. No connection, no sense of belonging to Hosea. And for the Lord, this picture of Israel being that child that says, I don't want you as parents anymore. Maybe some of you have children who are difficult, or maybe you were a difficult child. I think in this church we probably have, if I were to ask for show of hands, everybody who was a difficult kid, a lot of you would probably raise your hands, yeah. And I remember distinctly, my mom actually will tell you, if she's here, you can ask her, I'll be happy for you. Outside of J.C. Penney's, I got the whooping of my life. And you know what? It didn't work, man. I just kept going, like that. And I'm on the floor, I'm kicking, I'm screaming, I'm just going at it, just giving her all that I've got, I was that kid that would scream and yell all the most hurtful things. You're not my mom! All that kind of stuff. And hear the Lord from His perspective. Hear the Lord from His perspective at the place where with Israel having turned their back on Him time and time again. Israel having rejected the compassion and mercy really that He offered. And we do that all the time with the Lord. And He basically says, you're not my people and I'm not your God. But don't worry, it doesn't end there. We have more to read, more to study. What an amazing turn of events we see in verse 10. Yet, with all of that said, yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, echoing His promise to Abraham, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it will come about that in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. And the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together. In other words, the two kingdoms reunited. And I believe this is a foreshadowing of Christ coming. And then notice the rest of this. And the sons of Judah, they'll be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader. There's your Jesus. They will go up from the land, and look at this. For great will be the day of Jezreel. I told you some of the past history of Jezreel. I didn't tell you about the future history of Jezreel. If you study the book of Revelation with us on Wednesday nights, you know that Jezreel is also the location of the final battle of Armageddon, where God's champion, Jesus, where the forces of God will completely decimate and destroy in the final battle the forces of evil. Armageddon, Megiddo, right there on the ground in the same area there with the valley of Jezreel. So this is an amazing left turn, isn't it? Verse 10 and 11. After these sort of harsh warnings and very judgmental sounding verses about these children's names, and Hosea, go marry a harlot because I'm tired of the harlotry of Israel. And yet He comes back and closes out with this promise. And it reminds me that some of these harsh sounding chapters that we'll study together in Hosea really are meant to be shocking warnings to wake a sleeping people. And I don't know if you're like that, but I am like that in my spiritual life. I grew up in the church. Some of you grew up in the church. I've heard it all. I've seen it all. I've been backstage. I got the T-shirt. I know what church is all about. And sometimes that familiarity leads me to an arrogance that breeds cynicism. And I think, I don't need this. I don't need that. I'm fine. I can learn from God on my own in Hawaii. Or I can just go out by the beach and listen to the ocean and get this real sense of God out there, and that's kind of all I need. Well, I would just caution you. I'll just warn you. Don't allow that kind of arrogance to blind you from your own need. To the point where you say, I don't need your compassion. I don't need your mercy. I don't even need to be your child. I don't need to be numbered among your children. We don't want to get there, do we? That's why it's important to come and to be reminded of the things that matter. Yeah, you might have read this book 10 times. I've read it a ton of times. But every time I step into it, it's like stepping into a stream for the first time. It's different every time. Any stream you step in is different. The water has moved on. It's a new stream. And the Word of God just seems to be like that for me. Maybe it does for you too. Every time I study it in depth like this, there's something new for me.